This is the class change ceremony. Simon was deeply engrossed in the process that could grant him extraordinary powers. The sensation of enormous power continuously flooding into his body made him feel as if every single pore was invigorated. The entire ceremony lasted approximately 15 minutes, after which the glow of the hexagonal alchemy formation gradually faded. All materials seemed as if they had been incinerated, turning into a pile of ash devoid of any spiritual energy. I made it! Joy surged in Simon's heart. Because he could see his status panel, after the successful class change, he could clearly perceive the transformation in his body. Each attribute of his body had improved: strength, perception, constitution, all had increased by 3 to 5 points roughly. But the most drastic improvements were in 3 attributes. Agility had jumped from 6 to 24. Skill escalated from 8 to 35. Mental strength also soared from 19 to 31, it was a direct doubling of growth. And on the status panel, a new passive skill called multitasking emerged. Just like integrating a soul fragment, Simon found new abilities enveloped in his mind, as if they were deeply rooted in his bones. The most direct change brought about by the data upgrade was that Simon felt stronger. Especially the 3 attributes with significant improvements made him vividly experience the extraordinary feeling. The agility change made him light as a feather, and with a single leap, he could jump several meters high. The enhancement in skill made him feel significantly more flexible. His nerves recruitment ability for muscles became extremely strong, allowing him to precisely control every bone and muscle in his body. Although the increase in mental strength didn't have any specific manifestation, Simon felt that his senses had become much clearer. At that moment, Simon felt like a Superman. He believed that his current self could wrestle 10 of his former selves. Also, the most direct reaction to the data enhancement was the skills on his status panel. The 2 skills Simon mastered, Basic Gun Mastery and Advanced Swordsmanship, had directly evolved into Intermediate Gun Mastery 334/800 and Basic Swordsmanship Mastery 99/300. The improvement in skill can directly amplify my mastered skills? Simon was slightly surprised. He anxiously wanted to experience the sensation difference brought about by the skill level enhancement, hence he drew his pistol from his waist. He immediately felt the difference. At that moment, the gun no longer felt like a tool, but an extension of his arm. He believed that if he fired a shot, he could easily hit the target with a casual aim. This is what it feels like to be an intermediate gun master. Just one level up and it's this powerful. Simon's eyes sparkled with excitement. He would never understand what it feels like to be at a higher level until he reaches there. What he couldn't understand before, now all became clear. He even felt that with a little more practice, he could barely perform the high-level skill, firearm art. But after a little thought, he understood. The significant improvement in skill allowed him to control every small and large muscle group in his body at a minute level. The enhancement in muscle control, be it for swordsmanship or gun skills, will inevitably lead to a drastic improvement in proficiency. Swish, the gun spun in Simon's hand and precisely tucked back into its holster. Then, a thought struck him. He swiftly drew out 2 guns, pointing them at the room's entrance and the windowsill simultaneously. At that instant, a new passive skill was automatically unlocked on the status panel. Looking at the changes on his status panel, Simon remarked, multitasking, wow, I even unlocked dual weapon mastery. It was a completely new and wonderful experience. Simon could clearly feel how his left and right brain were controlling his left and right hand, each aiming at a different target. The 2 sets of instructions in his brain, to find a target, aim, and pull the trigger, were distinctly separate, each capable of operating independently. Although both were dual-wielding, they had fundamentally different essences. One was about knowing how to use both hands, the other was about mastery. His combat power had increased significantly. The Deerhorn Inn was not a shooting range, there weren't the conditions for live fire. Simon put away his gunpowder night gun. The skill, multitasking, was strong for the gunner profession, but in reality, it was a directional ability awakening for the puppet master profession. Simon cast his eyes back to the wooden box that had previously housed the puppets. On it was a striking text, "Puppet Making for Beginners." The extremely high spiritual power growth and the passive ability of multitasking were obviously exclusive skills of the puppet master. The road is still long. Simon contemplated to become a qualified puppet master. He had to learn a lot of things, such as puppet making and maintenance. The process of making a puppet was extremely complex. This involved engraving, enchanting, rune making. Each process required a lot of time to study. For example, the most basic rune drawing. Don't be fooled by the simple task of drawing some special symbols on the puppet, the road to mastery is long. Can you immediately draw on a sketch without any basic knowledge? A minor mistake can greatly reduce the combat effectiveness of the rune puppet. It looks like I need to go to the shadow market again, buy some spirit wood, and try to make my own rune puppet. Simon wasn't afraid of difficulties, on the contrary, he enjoyed the process of learning new knowledge. At this moment, he, a time traveler, suddenly had an intriguing thought. Wait, the material for the puppet doesn't have to be spiritual wood. He remembered the scene when Penelope was controlling the puppet group to attack bald Ivan in the underground forgotten manor. That time, Ivan, who had awakened the steel skeleton and possessed the dragon scale armor implant, was wreaking havoc in the puppet group. Ordinary puppets with melee weapons couldn't hurt him at all. A large part of the combat power of the puppet master profession lies in the puppets. And the attack power of the puppet itself is also the most important factor in determining the outcome of the battle. If wooden puppets are easily broken, what about mechanical puppets with hot weapons? When Simon thought of this, his expression suddenly brightened up. The reason for using puppets was for better control. After all, the lighter the puppet, the more room for control. Low-level puppet masters simply couldn't control very heavy puppets, but it's not 1,000 years ago. Old Spirit Town had steam-powered devices from the steam revolution era. If a miniature steam power furnace could provide enough power for the heavy steel knight arm and external skeleton, why couldn't it provide power for the mechanical puppet? As he thought of this, Simon's thoughts began to diverge. As a time traveler, he didn't have any conservative concepts, whether it was technology or supernatural powers. Weren't they all for becoming stronger? Having seen all sorts of high-tech products from his previous life, a lot of design inspiration popped into his head. Since there's no magic control system in this world, wouldn't it be possible to have a steel titan puppet or a transforming knight puppet? Simon felt as if he had opened the door to a new world, and he could already picture controlling not a group of wooden puppets, but a group of mechs. However, to turn the thoughts in his head into reality was fraught with difficulties. It was like turning the technology for making fireworks into rocket technology. They might look similar, but the technological content was worlds apart. First of all, the flexibility of machinery wasn't enough. Even with a powerful steam drive, the weight of steel far exceeded that of wooden puppets. Secondly, to create a mechanical puppet, he needed to master the profound steam drive technology and the art of puppet making. And of course, there was also alchemy, the foundation of all things. For Simon, a time traveler, there was too much to learn. All knowledge had to start from scratch. The amount of knowledge required was probably equivalent to several hundred years of study. However, he had the touch of the Grim Reaper. Simon felt that his future self would probably take a new path that was completely different from traditional puppet masters, that is, steel puppet master. It was only after becoming a professional that Simon truly understood the difference between a professional and a non-professional. This was just the gap in physical attributes and skill enhancement after becoming a professional. The key to significantly improving the professional's combat power, however, lay in alchemy implantation. Although Simon couldn't see others' attribute panels, he could guess that his own attributes, which were evolved into a rare job, puppeteer, using gold materials, would absolutely crush those of other similar job holders. This made him increasingly worried about the direction of his future alchemy implantation. Such excellent talent and attributes seemed too wasteful to use ordinary implantation blueprints. Even Nightingale's silver implantation, 1,000 kill feather wings, from the guild, Simon always felt it was somewhat inadequate. High agility matched well, but high skill and high spirit were somewhat wasted. Without much thought, as a professional, Simon meditated in the inn for a whole day after becoming a professional. He needed time to adapt to the explosive attributes after becoming a professional. Rune Puppet brought a leap in his physical fitness, and this growth would continue to decay over a long period of time in the future, until the curse characteristics of the materials are completely digested. During the entire digestion process, he would hear whispers in his ears from time to time. These were the insights that the original alchemist who refined the puppeteer inheritance material wanted to give him. He might comprehend more professional abilities during this process. At nightfall, the fog that enveloped the whole city began to thicken again. It was time for the guild meeting. Simon woke up from his meditation ahead of time. His thoughts returned to reality and the unbearable noise from the next room rushed over. He glanced at the poor condition of the room, frowned and muttered, "It seems I need to find a long-term residence." He checked out and left the inn. Simon arrived at the assembly point 15 minutes earlier than the scheduled time. At the abandoned building next to Greenwood Street, a fire was lit in a barrel, and the flickering firelight cast monstrous shadows on the wall. But the atmosphere today seemed a bit off. Captain Carl sat on the steps on one side with a cold face, not showing the slightest smile. The old soldiers were also not joking and laughing as usual, as if they knew something was going to happen. They all sat quietly. Simon walked to the edge of the road, found a position, squatted there like the old soldiers. More people came one after another, and some, noticing the weird atmosphere, whispered in low voices. "What happened? I see the captain's face doesn't look good. Hey, the sniper who attacked us yesterday was investigated." It was an old man from the guild, Miller. He and Captain Carl had a good relationship. "It's a pity." "Ah, you mean Captain Miller of Redfern Street is the mole?" "Shush, the captain is in a bad mood, don't mention it." Simon listened to it on the side and roughly understood why Carl was upset. But he wasn't too surprised. He had guessed early that there wouldn't be many snipers who could accurately snipe targets from that distance. If it was someone inside the Cross Society, they would probably be easily found. Friends turned into moles, naturally, Carl's face wouldn't look good. However, when Simon heard that the sniper had committed suicide, he felt that things might not be so simple. But he didn't think more about it, it was something for the guild's higher-ups to worry about. After a while, everyone was here. Carl did not waste any words, he said with a black face directly, "Those who didn't show up for the guild's action yesterday, step forward." His voice wasn't loud, but everyone heard the coldness in his tone. Everyone looked at each other. At this moment, 2 old soldiers of the guild came out with pale faces. "Captain, I didn't want to. I drank too much yesterday, I really didn't hear the call to assemble." The big bearded man just wanted to explain something. Carl interrupted him, expressionless. "George, you're also an old man in the guild, you should know the guild rules very well. Do it yourself." Hearing this, the bearded man named George looked terrible, but he knew that the guild rules were ruthless. He gritted his teeth without saying more. He picked up an axe not far away, then without hesitation, he chopped his left wrist. With a crack, the sharp axe cut off his wrist in one go. The severed hand fell to the ground and blood splattered. George, drenched in sweat, looked at Carl and lowered his head. "Captain, I was wrong." Carl still didn't speak. He glanced at another person. "Donald, what about you?" The other thin, rooster-headed man was pale with fright, but he also came out trembling. Not everyone could cut off their own hand without blinking. This guy was still so scared he stammered, "Captain, I can't do it." As soon as he finished speaking, a flash of cold light, another severed hand fell to the ground. A loud scream echoed through the building. Simon and some guild members witnessed a bloody guild execution. It was a common occurrence here. The guild was lax in discipline, but once the rules were broken, there was no mercy. Losing an arm wasn't a big deal in this world, a basic prosthetic cost only a couple of grand. But the 2 unlucky ones didn't participate in yesterday's mission, so they didn't get any bonus. They probably had to live with a broken arm for quite some time. At 7 o'clock in the evening, Carl led everyone on a patrol around 3 blocks on Greenwood Street, clocking off half an hour later. The veterans went their separate ways after work, some went for drinks, others went looking for women. Simon returned to the side of the Redstone Castle arena and started his night of gambling. He seemed to have beginner's luck, winning 2 rounds in a row. But the stakes were small, only 1,000 per bet. He planned to bet on either the red or the blue side for all the events of the night, which would save the trouble of betting each time. This method wouldn't make him rich, but statistically speaking, he wouldn't lose too much either. Simon wasn't really there for the money, so he didn't mind. Just when he decided to bet this way, a hearty female voice came from behind him, seemingly asking him, "Who do you think will win the next round?" He turned around and saw a tough-looking woman with 4 long knives at her waist and bright green hair. She walked up to Simon and leaned casually against the railing. She looked serious, like a true gambler. "Boss?" Simon found the woman familiar. Looking at the savage tattoo on her exposed arm, he recognized her. It was Selena, one of the top members of the Cross Guild. She wasn't in her sexy red leather battle gear from yesterday, but her imposing figure was hard to conceal even in a loose robe she wore today. Selena looked surprised when Simon called her boss. She glanced at him and said, "Newcomer?" Simon nodded, "Yeah." He figured she recognized him from the cross insignia on his clothes. Selena didn't seem to mind the formality, like Carl and the others. "Just call me Sister Selena." Simon nodded, "All right, Sister Selena." But he couldn't help but wonder, what was she doing at the arena? Selena's attention returned to the arena. It looked like she was truly obsessed with gambling. She came here just to gamble. She asked again, "You seem to have good luck. Who do you think will win the next round?" "I'm not sure." Simon knew that his 2 red rune pieces had exposed that he had already won 2 rounds. But he was only betting to blend in. His real purpose here was to collect relics from the defeated warriors. There was no side he favored. Selena didn't seem satisfied with his hesitant answer. She raised her eyebrows and asked, "Then who are you going to bet on?" "The blue side, I guess." Simon felt that if he bet on the red side again, it would seem insincere, so he switched to blue. To his surprise, upon hearing his choice, Selena immediately waved over a maid and loudly declared, "Put 10,000 on the blue side." Selena, with a well-practiced flip of the wrist, plunked down a hefty stack of gold coins onto the serving girl's tray without a second glance. She carried herself like a seasoned regular, despite the sizable bet of 10,000 gold coins. Even for a knight commander like herself, this was no small wager. Simon twitched slightly at the sight, hoping she wouldn't blame him if she lost. To blend in with the crowd, he followed suit, throwing in 1,000 gold coins for the blue knight. Ding, 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 the clear ring of the iron bell signaled the start of the match. With a charged rush, 2 gladiators collided in the arena, commencing a brutal fight to the death. Luck seemed to favor the severely wounded Blue Knight who barely claimed victory. "Whoa, you've got some luck there," Selena exclaimed, visibly excited. Having won her bet, she turned to Simon with a grin, asking, "Who do you think will win the next round?" Simon didn't care about the outcome or understand the betting, he was there merely for the spectacle. However, with the earnest Knight Commander looking at him, he couldn't brush her off. Wanting to fit in, he spouted some superstitious nonsense, "If red wins, then blue must win next. I guess the Blue Knight will win, right?" "That makes sense," Selena said, nodding enthusiastically. Having just won a round, she summoned the betting girl, placing all her winnings on the table with a decisive, "Let's go all in on the Blue Knight." Something felt off to Simon. The commander seemed to have a bit of a gambling problem. Hesitant, he finally echoed, "I will put 1,000 on it too." If not for the ominous runes and the 4 swords at her waist, who would guess that this woman, whose eyes sparkled at the prospect of gold, was a dark knight? Simon stole a glance at her. She was undeniably beautiful, her features fine and her figure splendid, exuding an air of mature sensuality. But she was a killer, a reality Simon dared not forget. He quickly averted his gaze. Ding, ding, ding. The bell tolled again, heralding another gladiatorial match. This time, the fighters were evenly matched, locked in a grueling battle that kept audiences on the edge of their seats. Roars of encouragement filled the air, with Selena among the most vocal, cheering passionately for her chosen Blue Knight. "Oh, take him down, Blue Knight. Hey, buddy, use the guillotine, strangle him. Damn it, what an idiot, seize the advantage." Selena sounded like a frustrated coach, simultaneously shouting instructions at the gladiators. Simon couldn't help but wonder if this counted as cheating. As a formidable fighter herself, her advice could potentially sway the game. But Simon's focus was on the fighter's movements. His heightened senses, a result of becoming a knight, enhanced the perception of his all-seeing eye. This ability allowed him to pick up every detail, as if viewing a slow-motion replay. "It isn't an illusion, my left eye has changed," Simon murmured to himself, confirming his earlier suspicion. Ever since becoming a knight, Simon noticed changes in his all-seeing eye. He could now see farther and in finer detail. Flies were no longer fast-moving blurs, but clearly defined creatures with transparent, vibrating wings. Watching the gladiatorial match, he saw every move the fighters made. It was clear to him that his talent had been elevated alongside his knightly abilities. An S-rank talent is not that simple, he mused. Simon's train of thought was suddenly interrupted as a strong arm wrapped tightly around his neck. Before he could react, he found himself pressed against something warm and soft, like waves crashing against him. "Huh. I won again." Selena's voice rang in his ear, eliciting a startled realization. This was the strength of a knight. Even with his heightened agility and quick reflexes, he had barely managed to react in time. Selena released Simon and laughed heartily, "Haha, you're lucky. Otherwise, if I'd lost everything, I'd have to live off my brothers for the rest of the month." At her words, Simon froze. Was this all the money she had? Her grand wager of 10,000 gold coins was her entire savings. It seemed gamblers were always broke, no matter which world they were in. Simon had thought Selena would quit while she was ahead, considering she'd already won a substantial sum of gold. However, she turned to him again, "Hey, who do you think will win the next round?" Her eyes glowed with an intense green light, filled with excitement and determination. With 4 consecutive victories, the stakes for Simon were low. But knowing that Selena was betting her entire savings, the pressure was on. "Do you still want to gamble?" he asked. "Why not?" She replied, adding, "I've been cooped up for months, I need some excitement tonight." She then added, "Besides, not betting after a win or not quitting after a loss are the 2 taboos of gambling." Upon hearing this tone, Simon snorted, "Stop persuading. She is clearly a gambling addict." But he also thought if she lost everything, she probably wouldn't bother him watching the game. With that thought, he casually said, "I'm going to bet on the red side next time." Selena curiously asked, "Are you still only betting 1,000? Simon nodded, "Yes." "Well, not being greedy is commendable." Despite sounding like a compliment, Selena looked bored. She suddenly changed the subject, lamenting, "But gambling without raising the stakes is soulless. When will you make a fortune if you don't increase your bets when luck is on your side?" Simon's head ached hearing these old gambling sayings. Ignoring Simon's reaction, Selena called the betting girl over, "Place all those bets on the red side." Watching this, Simon's forehead twitched. Betting all in every time, this woman is wild. But it's fine, if she loses, at least it will be quiet. But things didn't go as planned. Perhaps fate was playing tricks on him. Simon guessed the outcome correctly again. The red gladiators defeated the blue ones again. Then, the dramatic scene continued. Every time Selena placed a bet, she would ask Simon, then she would place her entire bet based on his casual answer. One novice dared to predict, one brave lady dared to bet. Just like that, this odd duo gradually became the focus of the entire Colosseum. The next round they won, the round after that they won again, no matter how. Simon guessed, he always won. The eerie repetition of these familiar scenes. In the end, the two of them guessed right for 8 consecutive rounds. Selena's original stake of 10,000 gold coins, all in each time, turned into a staggering 2 million plus. Even Simon, for the first time, saw such a large pile of gold coins. It was like a small mountain of gold coins, constantly stimulating people's nerves, driving the spectators in the Colosseum crazy. Simon didn't want to attract so much attention, but his luck seemed a bit too good. Luckily, after the 8th round, he breathed a sigh of relief. Because the final round of gladiator battles had ended, finally, he didn't have to guess for this leader anxiously. Ha ha ha, the betting tips that Godric gave me really worked. If your own luck isn't good, follow those who are lucky, or find someone who's unlucky and bet against them. You're Simon, right? From now on, you belong to me, Selena. If someone bullies you, just mention my name. The leader was very happy about winning the gold coins. Simon decisively rejected her proposal to continue to the Colosseum, intending to slip away, but at this moment, a bloody Carl found them. Miss Selena, why didn't you tell me when you came? Hey, why are you covered in so much blood, young man? I had some conflicts with a few guys who didn't know better, probably members of the Steam Night group. Oh? Where are they now? I killed them and threw them in the canal. They were just small fries, not worth the hassle. Upon hearing Carl's words, Selena pursed her lips. Her thirsty sword at her waist seemed to have quieted down, but she had won gold coins today and was in a good mood. She waved her hand. Let's go, I'll treat you guys to some drinks. Simon, as the hero who won the gold coins, naturally couldn't refuse, so he reluctantly followed them to the Lionheart pub. On the way, Carl and Selena chatted. Miss Selena, what brings you to Grand Street? Hee, do you want me to arrange something for you? You naughty boy, I'm here for serious business, okay? What business? To meet someone, and to give you a message. Are you meeting the Red Devil, Goran? Oh, you're quite smart, young man. The club president wants to invite him to join, so I need to make arrangements. Oh, what else? One of the enemies who attacked our headquarters yesterday escaped. He took something very important from our warehouse. We've been tracking him, but his traces disappeared near the streets of Gran. The president doesn't want that object or the forbidden item to be taken away, so be more vigilant. Simon had expected the Red Cross Society's top brass to actively recruit the Red Demon Gordon. After all, a great master who had been expelled from the inner city would undoubtedly be a great boost to any faction in the outer city. The Raven Gang and the Steam Party were probably in touch as well, otherwise the President Charles wouldn't have sent Selena, a core member of the Red Cross Society, to visit in person. Simon now roughly understood the difference between the professionals of the inner and outer city. Though it wasn't absolute that inner city professionals were stronger, the average combat power of the professionals of the same rank in the inner city, which concentrated over 90% of the resources of the Old Dundon, was undeniably much higher than that of the outer city. For instance, the silver-planted blueprints and appointment materials that were rare in the outer city often appeared at the inner city auction, and even rarer ancient cursed items were available. After all, only the wealthy individuals could afford to pay a good price for the good stuff that the wasteland hunters brought back from the ruins. Over time, the major financial tycoons must have accumulated a lot of rare alchemical resources. The difference in resources was the root cause of the gap in combat power between the professionals of the inner and outer cities. Like Gordon, the Red Demon, a bodyguard could get top resources, which was unimaginable in the outer city. In the Elephant Bar, the heavy metal music was deafening. Simon followed Selena and Carl and found a seat. Selena waved her hand and ordered, "Hey, bartender, 3 cups of gold medal rye whiskey." The gambling woman, who had just won some money, was not stingy and ordered the most expensive drink in the house. Each of them had a big jug. The gold medal rye whiskey, because it was a good product directly from the inner city distillery, was not cheap either. A jug cost about 1,000 lisos, equivalent to half a month's salary for an ordinary worker. Simon didn't taste anything special about the whiskey, its taste was similar to the common mixed whiskey he had in his previous life. But when he saw the ingredients of the drink, he understood that the cost of the drink was largely due to the water used in it. The water source of the Old Dundon was not scarce, but clean water was. The groundwater was mixed with large amounts of dark energy materials, direct consumption of which could lead to malformation. To remove these pollutants, it was necessary to have large filtration water factories. It was said that the filtration cost was high, and the monopoly by the financial tycoons meant that only the residents of the inner city could enjoy the truly pure drinking water. In the outer city, the common people could only use substandard drinking water, and the price was not cheap either. The cost of drinking water was a major expense for most ordinary people. Simon had just joined the gang, and although he thought that Captain Carl and Selina were good people, he didn't know them very well. After taking his seat, he stayed silent, drinking his whiskey and listening to their conversation. "Sister Selina, you said that the guy who escaped ran to our Green Street and disappeared?" "Yeah. The tracking specialists in our gang chased him all the way to the next block, and then the trace disappeared. But neither the item nor the forbidden artifact can be put into the storage ring, so it won't be easy for that guy to escape. We speculate that he is most likely hiding in a sewer somewhere and doesn't dare to show his head. Also, young Carl, be careful when you work with the brothers lately. There seems to be some trouble at the top of the Black Tower, and there's quite a bit of turbulence among the top financial tycoons in the inner city. The Steam Party and the Raven Gang have big financial support in the background, so there may be some moves soon." "Got it, Sister Selina." As he listened, Simon noticed that they didn't say what that thing was. Maybe it was an understanding between them, or maybe they didn't know what had been lost themselves. But Simon knew, it must be that manuscript. As for the turmoil in the inner city, that seemed to be another world's problems for Simon, nothing to do with him. However, what Simon was more interested in was their so-called forbidden artifact. He understood that the forbidden artifact was apparently a black scythe about 2 meters long. And those invaders had used this scythe to cut open the door of the gang's vault. Simon didn't ask what the forbidden artifact was exactly, but from what he heard it seemed like a cursed item with special effects, like the rune puppet they mentioned. Given that the Red Cross Society, one of the top 3 gangs outside the city, was looking for it with such great effort, Simon was becoming more and more curious about these so-called forbidden artifacts. The only information he had now was that the scythe was very large and sharp, capable of slicing through metal doors easily, and the man who ran away with the treasure seemed to be hiding in a sewer near Green Street. As Simon sipped his whiskey, a thought flashed through his mind. The information I extracted from Shadow Scorpion Abel's memory mentioned a forbidden artifact hidden in the Moonlight Inn. I wonder what it is." He pondered, slightly lost in thought. With no opportunity to interrupt, Simon was either drinking or idly playing with a coin in his hand. At the moment, the coin on his palm was flexibly turning among his fingers, from his thumb to his pinky, and then flipping back from the end. No matter how his hand swung, there was no sign of the coin falling off. This was a direct reflection of the skill improvement after his successful appointment. Now he can precisely control almost every muscle on his fingers, and the coin seems to stick to the skin, rolling deftly and never falling off. Of course, this is not his idle play. In fact, Simon was practicing a puppeteer's compulsory skill, 10-fingerlienzone technique. This is the most basic operation technique for controlling puppets. It requires the operator's fingers to be flexible and versatile, using subtle trembles of fingers to make the puppets accurately perform certain actions. Now the skill is mastered, but the muscle memory is still a bit unfamiliar and needs constant practice. At this moment, Selina next to him seemed to notice Simon's boredom. She raised her glass again and said generously, "Cheers." "Cheers." Simon clinked glasses and took a big sip of wine. Selina was bold when drinking, taking big gulps of wine, with the wine spilling down her throat from the corners of her mouth. She naturally noticed Simon's coin-flipping action, raised her eyebrows and asked, "Are you on the gunner career path?" Simon nodded, yes. There was nothing to hide about it, it was even intentional. Although he had been appointed, Simon had no intention of revealing his special profession as a puppeteer. Occasionally displaying some skills of the gunner profession would make people believe he is a gunner. On the contrary, the more mysterious he acts, the more curious people will become. Selina seemed interested and casually asked, "Are you interested in learning the sword? Your hands are very flexible, you should learn quickly." Simon shook his head and politely declined, "Thank you, Sister Selina. But my awakened talent is Eagle Eye, gunner might be more suitable. Before he has the ability to protect himself, he plans to continue being invisible. Moreover, swordsman is not his career plan." "Oh, that's a pity." Selina pouted, but didn't say much. After musing for a moment, she suddenly said something that sounded a bit sad, "Kid, don't die so easily. There will certainly be a place for you in the guild in the future." This gang boss seems to have seen a lot of life and death, and used the most plain tone to express the most emotional expectation. Don't die. In a gang, that's the best expectation. Hearing this, Soren nodded with a smile, yeah. He found this lady's character very appealing, and felt a little moved in his heart, but sometimes, the plot twists can catch one off guard. The serious atmosphere had just begun when Mila suddenly put her arm around his shoulder and leaned in mysteriously, "There's one more thing." Soren looked serious, thinking it was something important, but the next moment, the lady's majestic image suddenly collapsed. Mila's eyes suddenly sparkled with that green light she had at the casino, and she excitedly said, "Ha ha ha. It's rare to meet someone with such good luck like you." Let me tell you, usually this kind of good luck lasts for a few days. See you at the arena tomorrow. Soren's eye twitched as he listened. So, telling me not to die so easily, is not because she cherishes talent, but because she fears losing her lucky tool. Pfft. Hearing this, the captain next to him couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of wine, and then burst into laughter. A leader, a knight commander, a foot soldier. This peculiar trio were having a great time drinking in the tavern. The trio, led by Simon, were in the heat of their festivities. Suddenly, Samuel and several knights from the Cross Knight Order rushed into the tavern with an air of panic, arming heavy crossbows. They scanned the tavern and their eyes instantly caught sight of Carl. Samuel, seeing no one else but Carl, rushed over to him, urgently saying, "Commander, we're in trouble. Among the troublemakers that we took care of earlier, it turns out one of them is the nephew of the leader of the Smoke Brothers. Word is, red-haired Constantine is on his way with a group of people, and it seems like they're planning to cause trouble. Commander, we should gather our brothers." His long-winded explanation left him practically out of breath. Clashes between knight orders were commonplace, especially in territories where two orders had contact. It was a matter of utmost urgency. With the enemy approaching with great momentum, the Cross Knight Order would need to gather their brothers. Even if they didn't necessarily break into a full-scale fight, they couldn't afford to be at a numerical disadvantage. However, when Samuel finished speaking, he found the atmosphere at the table somewhat odd. Shouldn't the commander slam the table and start rallying the troops? But Carl seemed very calm. He even picked up his glass, took a slow, nonchalant sip, and then scoffed, "A nephew? Looks like the Smoke Brothers are deliberately looking for an excuse to start a war." Simon remained silent, glancing at the gambling-addicted woman sitting next to him. In any other place, he might have been worried about his own safety. But here, Selena, with her back to the tavern entrance, went unnoticed by Samuel and the other knights who were too preoccupied with Carl. Noticing the tense atmosphere, they finally recognized the tattooed woman as Selena. "Selena!" Samuel and his men exclaimed with surprised delight. Selena took a sip of her drink and lazily asked, "What's going on?" "The Smoke Brothers." Samuel tried to repeat what he had just said earlier, but seeing Selena's uninterested expression, he quickly changed his words in a flattering manner. "Forget it, as long as you're here, we're safe. Everyone." Soon after, the distinctive rumbling of carriages could be heard outside. The notorious carriage party of the Smoke Brothers had arrived on Grant Street. Simon eyed the well-maintained, powerful carriages at the door with a hint of envy. The Smoke Brothers indeed had superior carriage modification skills in the outer city. More than 20 men, equipped with iron prosthetics and armed with various weapons, stormed into the Elephant Inn, causing the guests to scatter in fear. From their aggressive demeanor, it was clear they were here for revenge. But then, something dramatic happened. The spectacle ended in a bizarre way before it even began. The red-haired man leading the group spotted Carl at the table, raised his gun, and yelled, "Carl, you." But before he could finish his sentence, he caught a glimpse of the tattooed woman at the table, and his expression changed drastically. The harsh words he was about to utter were swallowed back down. Constantine, quick-witted as he was, wasted no more words, and quickly sheathed his raised gun. With a shake of his red hair, he turned and promptly left the tavern, as if he had simply taken the wrong turn. This scene left the guests, oblivious to the truth, utterly confused. The men of the Cross Knight Order, on the other hand, were in fits of laughter, mocking the retreat of the Smoke Brothers, ha ha ha. Selena ignored the departing members of the Smoke Brothers. As a member of the Cross Knight Order, she had not lost her dignity to the point of seeking trouble with a small team leader from the rival faction. Having had enough to drink, she turned to Carl and said, "Be careful, Carl. Those guys from the Smoke Brothers have been eyeing Grant Street for a while. They will probably cause more trouble." Carl pondered over her words. Understood, Selena. After all, they were part of a gang, always facing fights and killings. They had been prepared for this since the day they joined. After a day full of unexpected incidents since joining the faction, their days returned to normal. At 7 o'clock every evening, Carl would lead his team on patrol for half an hour, and then they would disperse. Life seemed rather leisurely. Even the guys from the Smoke Brothers, since that incident at the Elephant Inn, had not shown up again. The gambling-addicted woman, on the other hand, showed up at the fighting arena every night, engaging Simon in cockfights. But cockfighting was really a game of luck. Even if Simon had good luck at cockfighting, he couldn't win every time. Of course, he bet small, so losses were tolerable. But Selena, she was a true gambler, experiencing the highs and lows of gambling vividly. When she won, she was full of wisdom, talking about cutting losses when losing and quitting while ahead when winning. But when she was losing, she didn't care about any of that, doubling down after a loss, then doubling down again. No one could stop her. This betting strategy led to her blowing through the 200 gold coins she won on the first day in less than 2 days. This was typical for gamblers, living in luxury when winning and sleeping on the streets when losing. However, despite her gambling habits, this woman had decent character. After losing all her money, she freeloaded on food and drink, but never asked Simon or Carl for a single penny. Simon had to accompany her to the fighting arena every day to collect holy relics, so the two of them became quite familiar with each other. Selena didn't put on airs of superiority, and the two became somewhat of drinking buddies. It was no wonder she got along well with the members of the faction. After losing all her savings a few days later, Selena reluctantly left to complete some faction tasks to earn money. She made a date with Simon to continue their cockfighting in the future. After bidding farewell to this faction leader, Simon's life returned to normal. He would stay in the fighting arena until dawn every night, then find a carriage in to meditate, practice his puppet control techniques, read alchemy books. His days were regular and leisurely. He would collect holy relics every day, practice his professional skills, and his experience level shot up quickly. The fighting arena had 8 to 10 bodies a day, and occasionally there were professional battles. In a few days, he had stripped off a bunch of strange abilities, such as lip-reading expertise, dart skills, carriage driving skills, Gwent skills. Basically, he had a whole mixed bag of skills. However, he gradually noticed a problem. That was, as his level in crossbow and swordsmanship increased, the amount of experience he stripped from corpses was decreasing. He later realized that as he was close to advanced crossbow expertise, it was naturally impossible to learn much from a corpse with novice expertise. There was improvement, but not much. The good thing was that there was no risk, and he could slowly accumulate experience. During this time, Simon went to the underground market several times, but couldn't find the ideal blueprint for iron prosthetics. However, he heard that in a few days, the underground market would hold a monthly premium auction, which was a time when wilderness hunters and thieves sold their goods in bulk, and lots of good items would appear. He planned to try his luck then. One day, in the carriage inn. With a bang of a crossbow, the white powder on the walls fell off. Some poor schmuck just got a bolt to the chest. The noise was nothing new, but it still made Simon's arm twitch instinctively. His feather quill, dipped in blue ink, strayed from its intended path, leaving a glaring streak of failure across the body of the puppet he was working on, much like a misapplied lipstick. Another failure. Simon gazed at the puppet in front of him, its features distorted by his clumsy handiwork, and he felt a bitter helplessness. As focused as he was, there was no blocking out the constant clatter of crossbow bolts and brawls. The decrepit coaching inn was a hotbed for drunken altercation. In a world where everyone carried a crossbow, fights were bound to escalate quickly, and the resulting noise was nerve-wracking. Just yesterday, a prostitute and her accomplices had tried to murder a guard in the room above Simon's, nearly hitting him with errant bolts. It's so difficult to find a decent place to live, Simon sighed, tired of the constant noise. He wanted someplace quiet, with good soundproofing, and ideally, a practice range. Being a puppeteer was a rare profession. The skills were hard to acquire, there were no gladiators to learn from, and the processes of enchanting and inscribing were much more difficult than he had initially thought, requiring a calm environment and plenty of practice. Startled out of his work by the noise, Simon turned his attention back to the botched puppet. He twisted his fingers as if gripping an invisible object, and the puppet rose eerily to its feet. It was only half a meter tall, like a toddler learning to walk. The creaking of its wooden joints as it moved was unnerving. Simon remained still, his fingers twitching in rapid succession like a pianist's, and the puppet mimicked his movements. It was still somewhat rigid but could perform basic combat maneuvers like punching, kicking, rolling, and stabbing. When his fingers began to feel stiff from the exercise, Simon rested them. He sighed deeply, looking at the iron strings coiled around his fingers. The iron control strings aren't fine enough, nor durable enough. The control is too low. Finding the right material for the strings isn't easy, he muttered. It was the best he could find for puppet control, but it still wasn't good enough. He recalled Penelope's effortless control of dozens of puppets with her strings, handily restraining Ivan, and sighed at the chasm between their skills. Simon, a novice puppeteer, had a lot of work ahead of him if he wanted his puppets to be effective in combat. But he was optimistic, he was progressing well. He had several hours before work, so he planned to continue practicing his puppet control. But then, a call from Carl came through the carrier pigeon. All newbies, gather at the usual place. There's an aberrant task. Without wasting time, Simon checked his gear and ammunition and left his room. Not long after the gathering message was sent out, Constantine, the redhead of the Smoke Brotherhood, and his men quietly infiltrated the vicinity of Green Street. A mysterious voice came through the carrier pigeon. Captain Constantine, it's confirmed. Carl is leading a group of about 20 newbies to the ancient stone tower. An officer, a captain, and a gang member. This odd trio was having a blast at the tavern. Simon, Carl, and Selena were deep into their drinks. Suddenly, Samuel and several members of the Cross Guild barged into the tavern, heavy crossbows in hand. They scanned the room and immediately zeroed in on Carl, seated in a corner. With no one else in his eyes, Samuel strode over and said anxiously, "Captain, we're in trouble. Among those troublemakers we dealt with earlier, one was the nephew of a steam faction officer. Kurt, that redhead, is leading a group to us, possibly to cause trouble. We need to rally our brothers." He rattled off his worries, almost breathless. Gang skirmishes were a common sight here, especially on disputed territories. It should have been a moment of urgency. Their enemies were approaching with threatening momentum, and cross-guild must assemble their forces to avoid a numerical disadvantage. However, after Samuel finished, he found the mood at the table a bit strange. Shouldn't Carl slap the table and start rallying people? But Carl seemed very calm. He even picked up his drink, took a leisurely gulp, and chuckled, "The nephew? Seems like the steam faction just wants an excuse to start a fight." Simon remained silent, glancing at Selina, the compulsive gambler beside him. If it were elsewhere, he might have been worried for his safety. But not here. Selina, her back to the tavern's entrance, went unnoticed as Samuel and his crew were focused on Carl. They only recognized her once they sensed the strange atmosphere. "Selina?" They were all pleasantly surprised. Selina took a sip of her wine and lazily asked, "What's going on?" "The steam faction." Samuel started to recap the situation, but seeing Selina's disinterested expression, he quickly changed his tone. "As long as you're here, everything will be fine. Everyone." Before long, the roar of horse-drawn carriages resonated outside. The notorious Flying Horse group of the steam faction had arrived at Green Street. Simon looked at the exquisite steam carriages at the entrance, a tad envious. In the outer city, the steam faction indeed excelled in mechanical modification technology. Over 20 men with mechanical limbs and armed with crossbows and swords stormed into the Elephant Tavern, causing patrons to scatter in fear. The situation screamed of a vendetta, but what happened next was utterly dramatic. The confrontation ended bizarrely even before it began. The red-haired leader spotted Carl on the table and, crossbow in hand, roared, "Carl, you!" But before he could finish, he caught sight of Selina. His face turned white, and he swallowed his threatening words. Swiftly, he sheathed his crossbow and, without another word, turned to leave the tavern, as though he had taken a wrong turn. The tavern-goers, oblivious to the situation, were left baffled, while the cross-guild members burst into laughter. Selina didn't bother about the departing steam faction members. As a cross-guild executive, she wouldn't stoop so low as to pick a fight with a low-ranking enemy faction leader. Finishing their drinks, she warned Carl, "Carl, stay cautious. Those steam faction guys have their eyes on Green Street. Expect trouble." Carl nodded thoughtfully, understood, Selina. Being in a guild, they always had to be prepared for conflict from the moment they joined. Their first day in the guild was full of unexpected incidents, but everything went back to normal afterwards. Every night at 7, Carl would patrol with his team for half an hour before breaking off. Life was pretty laid back. Even the steam faction guys, after the tavern fiasco, never showed up again. And the gambling lady, Selina, was always seen at the Colosseum every night, dragging Simon along to bet. But gambling was all about luck. Even with Simon's good fortune, he couldn't win all the time. Of course, he bet small, so the losses were bearable. But Selina, she embodied a gambler's highs and lows. When she won, she was full of wisdom, spouting advice like know when to cut your losses and quit while you're ahead. But when she was losing, she disregarded her own advice, raising her bets after every loss. No amount of persuasion could stop her. Such reckless betting led her to exhaust her winnings of over 2 million in less than 2 days. This was the life of a gambler, living the high life when winning and hitting rock bottom when losing. But despite being a gambling addict, Selina was a decent person. After losing all her money, apart from freeloading on meals and drinks, she never asked Simon or Carl for a dime. Simon had to accompany her to bet every day as he needed to collect soul fragments from the Colosseum. This frequent interaction led to them becoming quite close. Selina didn't put on airs of a guild leader, so their relationship was rather friendly. After a few days, Selina had exhausted her savings and regretfully left to earn some money from guild tasks, promising to continue their gambling another day. With Selina gone, Simon's life returned to normal. He spent his nights at the Colosseum until dawn, practiced his puppetry skills, studied alchemy books, lived a regular and calm life. Every night, he collected soul fragments, improved his vocational skills, and gained experience rapidly. The Colosseum provided 8 to 10 corpses a day, occasionally hosting professional beast fights. He had also obtained a bunch of unusual abilities over the past few days: lip reading, knife throwing, carriage driving, card game skills. A vast array of abilities was at his disposal. However, he found an issue. As his heavy crossbow and combat levels increased, the experience he gained from the corpses decreased. He realized that as he approached expert heavy crossbow proficiency, he couldn't learn much from a corpse with beginner proficiency. Although he could learn from their strengths to make up for his weaknesses, the gains were minimal. Luckily, with no risks, he could still make progress over time. He had visited the black market a few times during this period but didn't find any desirable blueprints for mechanical limbs. However, he heard of an upcoming high-end auction held irregularly every month. It was a time when scavengers and thieves sold their loot, and many good items would appear. He planned to try his luck then. One day, in the inn. With a bang, a crossbow bolt shot out, causing the plaster on the walls to crumble. Not sure who the unlucky guy was who caught the crossbow bolt. Despite being used to such disturbances, Simon, sitting in an inn room, instinctively flinched at the sound. The rune feather pen, stained with blue paint in his hand, deviated from its intended path, leaving an eyesore of a mark on the wooden puppet, like smeared lipstick. Another failure. Simon mumbled, gazing at the puppet that had been disfigured by his handiwork, the bitterness of helplessness spreading through him. Although generally good at focusing, the frequent bustles of fights and crossbow firing were hard to ignore. The worn-out inn corridor often saw drunken tenants brawling. In this world where everyone owns a crossbow, fights often translate into crossbow battles, always a scary sight. Just yesterday, a sudden event of a prostitute conspiring to crossbow kill a mercenary occurred in the room above Simon's, and the crossbow chaos nearly pierced the floor and injured him downstairs. Finding a suitable place to live is pretty difficult. Simon sighed lightly, growing tired of this noisy environment. He wished to find a place that was soundproof, quiet, and preferably had a target range. Puppeteers were a rare profession and it was hard to find relevant skills among the gladiators in the arena. Enchanting and inscribing were far more challenging than imagined, requiring a quiet environment and loads of practice time. Disrupted already, Simon didn't bother about the noise anymore. Looking at the puppet in front of him that had been marked on incorrectly, an idea came to his mind. He twitched his fingers as if grasping some invisible object, and the puppet suddenly stood up. It was only half a meter tall and began to walk around like a toddler learning to walk. The sound of the wooden joints rubbing against each other was somewhat eerie. Simon stood in place, his fingers hopping around like playing a piano, and the puppet followed suit, performing actions. Although its movements were stiff, it could manage some combat moves like punching, kicking, rolling over, and stabbing. After a while, feeling his hand muscles stiffen, Simon stopped. He sighed a long sigh, looking at the iron wires wrapped around his fingers. Shaking his head, he muttered, "The wires aren't thin enough, and they aren't sturdy enough. The control is too low. Finding the right wire material really isn't easy." This was the best material he could find to control the puppet, but it was still somewhat disappointing. He was reminded of how Penelope had controlled dozens of puppets at once in the mansion ruin, effortlessly controlling bald Ivan with the wires. The same wire control, but their effects were worlds apart. As a novice puppeteer, Simon had a long way to go before he could use the puppet for combat. But he was optimistic, feeling that his progress over the past few days was pretty good. He had several hours before work and planned to continue practicing puppet control. But then, a call from Carl came through the communicator. "All newbies, gather at the usual place. We've got a mutant task." Without delay, Simon checked his gear and ammo, and stepped out of the door. Not long after the assembly message was sent out, Redhead Constantine from the Steam faction quietly infiltrated the vicinity of Greenleaf Street with a group of people. A mysterious voice came from the communicator. "Captain Constantine, it's confirmed. Carl has taken about 20 rookies to the tower." A group of 20 swaggered into the tall tower. Several veterans who had participated in many such events before took the lead. Before entering the dilapidated tower, Samuel loudly explained the precautions for the operation to the newcomers. "Check your ammo. Keep your spare torch guns handy, be careful, aim and shoot. Unless it's absolutely necessary, don't throw your handheld bombs indiscriminately, in case you don't kill the monster and end up burying yourself. Also, keep your gun pointed at the ground, not at the person in front of you. Don't keep your finger on the trigger, you might get startled and accidentally fire. Guild rules will be enforced. Don't talk loudly after entering, the evil monsters in the dark are very sensitive to sounds." Simon listened carefully. They were all very practical combat experiences. No wonder Carl asked the newcomers to come for training. He glanced at the tall tower not far away, his brows slightly furrowed. The isolated and dilapidated tower, like an ugly toad monster lying there. Those dark windows were like the lumps of flesh on its back. Simon always felt as if something was staring at their team. Perhaps it was just an illusion. Is it a person, or a monster? Simon couldn't figure out the source of his unease. He knew what this feeling meant. There were some clues in his mind that led to his unease, but they were not enough to form a clear connection, so it was intermittent. But he didn't say much, because everyone would be extremely careful in this kind of environment, even if he didn't remind them. Before he had time to think more, the team had already entered the tower. The interior of the tower was spacious. Somewhat similar to the malls Simon had seen in his previous life, the tower completely blocked out the outside. Light, the oil lamp in the team provided sufficient light, but even so, everyone seemed to have entered a dark world, with the light only illuminating a corner. Simon thought it was all right. After becoming a professional adventurer, his night vision ability had significantly improved. Even without the rudimentary night vision goggles, he could clearly make out the general outline of objects in the distance, but the other newcomers seemed a bit uneasy. The dark environment made them feel fear from the unknown, afraid that a monster would suddenly emerge from the depths of the darkness. At this moment, a gunshot suddenly exploded next to their ears. Bang! The flash of light illuminated the scene for a moment, and everyone saw a shadow fall from the beam not far away. Upon closer look, it turned out to be a large white rat. The sudden movement made all the newcomers shudder. No wonder Samuel warned them not to keep their fingers on the trigger before, otherwise, with that sudden shock, many guns might have misfired. Ahead, Samuel's hearty laughter rang out. Yo, we're in luck. This white rat's ear bone is a magic material worth 3,000 gold coins. Didn't expect to get a drop from just a random kill. Living in a hostile environment, monsters have a chance of producing magic materials in their bodies, but the probability of ordinary monsters producing these materials is very low. Usually only elite monsters or monster kings have a higher chance. Upon hearing this, Simon pondered. The first monster produced a magic material. Was it a coincidence? Or something else? The veterans saw the tense looks on the newcomers' faces and laughed. Hey, guys, don't be so nervous. This giant white rat is just the most common monster in the sewers. A shot to the head kills it. But be careful, they can jump up and bite off your bird. The veterans seemed to have gotten used to it. This operation was much safer than hunting in the wilderness. After all, they were in the old city of Lington, where monsters did not appear in groups. Even the evil humans were only 1 or 2. With more than 20 of them, they had an absolute advantage in strength, and they didn't need to be too careful. Carl rested his spear on his shoulder, looking very relaxed. At this moment, he also said, everyone get ready, the monsters in this tower should be coming. After the shot was fired, the sound immediately attracted the monsters in the dark, but as the veterans had said earlier, scattered monsters couldn't pose much threat to the team. The rest of the journey turned from monster extermination to a hunting game. The noise attracted the monsters in the dark, which saved everyone the trouble of searching room by room. Shortly after, 2 mutated humans, that might have been spotted by witnesses, appeared in the dark, and were shattered by the concentrated attack of the team. Simon had seen this monster twice outside the city. When he was alone and the environment was complicated, it was difficult to deal with. But for a team, a lone monster is simply a live target. Apart from one unlucky guy who stepped into a void and broke his leg, everything else went smoothly. Moreover, the gain was good. They found that the probability of monsters in this tower producing cursed materials was indeed much higher than outside the city. Within less than an hour, the folks from Green Street had cleared out the tower and arrived at the entrance of the so-called underground cave mentioned by that old man. This was not a collapsed entrance, but one with clear signs of construction, quite similar to the dungeon entrance from Simon's previous life. The smooth progress of this cleanup operation was somewhat boring. Probably feeling unsatisfied, an old hand asked, Captain, should we go down and take a look? Carl, gazing at the entrance to the underground cave, furrowed his brows. The last large-scale cleanup of these caves was 10 years ago. There were significant casualties then. I have no idea what kind of monsters are down there now. Clearly, he seemed to recall some unpleasant memories, shaking his head. Venturing into the underground cave requires stronger equipment and more manpower. We are not well prepared this time. There's no need to go down. Today's gains far exceeded expectations, which gave Carl a bad premonition. Simon blended into the crowd without making a fuss. He didn't get many chances to fire throughout the whole process, as the monsters were usually killed by a concentrated attack from the group the moment they appeared. Regardless of skills, with dozens of spears fired at once, there's always a hit. That's the advantage of having more people. Now hearing Carl saying they should head back, he felt relieved. His faint feeling of unease also made him worry about unexpected changes if they continued to explore. Just then, as if thinking made it so, his sight suddenly caught a human-like shadow darting out from the dungeon entrance. Simon's pupils contracted sharply, as he exclaimed in his mind, so fast. A mutated human? No, this was definitely not the speed of a normal, mutated human. And astonishingly, it could even climb the walls. Watch out! Almost at the same time, Carl let out a sharp warning. Evidently, he also spotted the shadow that darted out. Before his warning trailed off, a round of concentrated attacks followed, and although the monster was fast, its leg got hit by a spear, and then covered by a round of firepower, rendering it immobilized. However, before the group could celebrate, an alarmed scream erupted from the crowd. Ah! Hearing the scream, Simon turned around, his flame torch gun already firing, in one swift, smooth motion. Bang! His fire crossbow hit the long oral appendage that was hanging from the ceiling, and the screaming member of the group fell from midair. Everyone looked at Simon's smoking flame torch gun in shock, probably surprised at his quick reaction. but their attention was immediately drawn away by something else. Looking at the broken half of the wriggling oral appendage on the ground, everyone's face turned pale. It was a thick, bright red organ, its sharp teeth wriggling in the red flesh, inducing trypophobia. Samuel swallowed hard and leaned closer, using his gun to touch the still twitching oral appendage, and asked, "What kind of monster is this?" The veterans also looked puzzled, no one recognized it. "I've never seen it before." Carl's face turned serious as he looked at the smashed body and the broken oral organ. "This monster is definitely not simple, even an out-of-control magician wouldn't have such speed. If it weren't for Simon's quick shooting, they would have had one unlucky person dragged away by that monster." Carl's expression grew solemn as he looked at the underground cave entrance and said, "Something's wrong. These kinds of monsters have never appeared in the underground tunnels of the city before. I think we better leave first." Simon's all-seeing eye gave him superior vision. The moment he saw the monster, its name was revealed to him. Mutated demon beast. Detailed explanation: a demon beast affected by special environmental conditions. Its weaknesses are the same as humans, hitting the head or heart can quickly kill it. But at this moment, he didn't bother to ponder what caused the monster's mutation. Now that two monsters have appeared here, it might mean there are many more in the underground cave. "Let's go." Carl clearly realized that they couldn't stay here for long and was about to call everyone to leave. But at that moment, sudden shrill screams rang out. Twee, twee, twee. The next moment, several fire bottles lit up the surroundings. The strong light illuminated the entire tower space, and the hidden monsters seemed to be frightened and hid in various caves. Upon a closer look, the people of Green Street saw a group of people with various magical modifications to their limbs had them surrounded. Samuel recognized the newcomers and cried out angrily, "Hot Power Knights! Damn it, we're ambushed!" Seeing this, Simon's face turned cold. Only then did he realize where his sense of danger had come from earlier. It turned out not to be these monsters, but these guys from the Hot Power Knights. He looked at the underground cave entrance, then at the block tower exit, and muttered to himself, "They've chosen a good place for an ambush. Well, if it isn't Captain Carl." "It's been a while," the voice echoed in the tower, the sneer and the words clear to all. The folks from the Steam Guild looked down from above, surrounding the people of Green Street at the base of the tower. The leader was none other than red-haired Constantine, who had previously appeared in the Golden Deer Tavern. He looked at Carl, a confident smile playing on his face. Simon glanced at the enemies, his expression turning serious. Two professional adventurers, this could be troublesome. Constantine's alchemical device was the fire lizard, its primary ingredient being the oil gland of a fire lizard, an unconventional and somewhat weak cursed material. Despite this, the device gave him a high resistance to fire and the ability to manipulate flames. After adding some finely tuned mechanical flamethrowers, he became a pseudo-fire elementalist. This combination of machinery and alchemical device made him a mainstream, new-school alchemist. Although not as flexible as a pure first-tier old-school fire alchemist, nor as strong as a regular professional adventurer, he was nevertheless formidable, and more importantly, cost-effective. As new school members, the Steam Guild folks focused more on machinery than alchemy. To them, alchemical devices were merely auxiliary tools, while machinery were their main focus. Although this shortcut approach could limit the potential of their devices, there was no limit to the enhancements that could be added to their machinery. However, Constantine alone posed little threat to Carl. If it was a one-on-one fight, Carl, a high-agility assassin, would have a higher chance of killing Constantine. However, the enemies had already accounted for this. Another member of their team had also unveiled his alchemical device. A man in a black trench coat, wearing an octopus metal mask. The exposed skin on his hands and neck shimmered with a dark metallic glow. Recognizing him, Simon's mind clicked into place, captain of the Western 13th District, Steel Guerrilla, Sylvester. Being aware of the continuous battles between the Cross Society and the Steam Guild, Simon had done his homework on the notable professional adventurers from the opposing gang. This Steel Guerrilla, Sylvester, had awakened the Beast Transformation talent C-071 Gorilla, which allowed him to transform into a giant ape, significantly enhancing his strength, speed, and toughness, a formidable close combat talent. Furthermore, he had obtained a niche alchemical device, the Iron-Armored Lizard Skin, and combined it with the Steam Guild's research on a highly durable, metallic biological skin, providing him with an ultra-strong defense capable of withstanding gunfire. Hence, he earned the title, Steel Guerrilla. This is going to be tricky. Observing the situation, Simon realized that they were specifically targeting Carl. One was an attacker, the other a defender. Although Carl's blade was sharp, capable of cutting through people in one strike, it seemed that Steel Guerrilla was prepared for this type of assassin. At the very least, Carl's blade wouldn't be able to kill him in a short span of time. As for red-haired Constantine, he didn't pose as much of a threat. While his fire control ability was strong, its attack range was limited. To the experienced Simon, Constantine was quite predictable with his single-mode attack and easily anticipated flamethrower direction. Firstly, Simon had already advanced to high proficiency in longbow technique, enough to turn that guy into a sieve using his kite method, but there was still the iron beast, Sylvester. Simon squinted at the man in the trench coat upstairs, wondering, I don't know if the armor-piercing magic arrow can penetrate that guy's magic goggles. Without practical data, it was hard to judge. Rumor has it, this guy has a record of withstanding magic arrows. The only apparent weakness, his eyes, are hidden behind rune-embedded goggles, which didn't seem easy to break. Plus, since it's one of the few weaknesses on his body, that guy would surely guard it dearly. Simon felt, choosing these two knights as the initial targets wasn't logical because the most problematic situation at the moment was not the two knights, but the number of enemies. There were nearly 50 enemies, dozens of longbows and fire arrows were aimed at the people on Green Street under concentrated fire. Casualties were inevitable. Simon was not sure he could avoid the concentrated fire in time. However, for him, there was a piece of good news. Most of the arrowheads were aimed at Carl after all. In their eyes, only Carl, the knight, was the biggest threat. Thinking of this, Simon's eyes started to wander. Knight group duel was a daily routine for knights. The veterans were mentally prepared and could die at any time in a duel with the opposing knight group. But the new soldiers seemed a bit at a loss. Perhaps it was because of these trembling new soldiers that the guys from the Steam Guild did not take action immediately. It was like a hunter seeing his prey falling into a deep trap. He wouldn't kill it right away, but would enjoy his masterpiece. Red-haired Constantine, from a high position, laughed and said, Captain Carl, yo, you don't look so well. Hee hee. Is that all the Steam Guild's got? Running away with your tails between your legs last time at the Golden Deer Tavern, and now you want to play dirty? Carl mockingly retorted. Then, he whispered to the knights beside him, their attention is mostly on me, I'll draw fire later, you guys find a chance to act. Be prepared for a desperate fight, guys. Surrender was out of the question. The knight group duel would only end when one side was wiped out. Everyone was aware of this. As Simon was being pointed at by the longbow, his adrenaline surged. He was also mentally prepared to face emergencies, and showed no surprise on his face. However, upon closer inspection, he noticed something strange. Simon's excellent eyesight made it clear that among a group of archers upstairs, two of them were staring at him. With their sights, the moment their eyes met, he knew he had been given special treatment. Simon was puzzled. Why are those two targeting me instead of the veterans and Carl? The other archers were casually aiming at the crowd, but the two archers had their sights precisely locked on him. Simon thought for a moment and immediately realized, could it be because he was too close to the big boss earlier, and was now being targeted? He couldn't help but pout a little, thinking that he should avoid getting involved with big shots in the future, otherwise he would be targeted by enemies. Since Simon noticed he was being targeted, he didn't make any rash moves, and the crossbow in his hand slowly loosened. The enemy, this move was non-threatening and would make them lower their guard. But others didn't know that Simon was rapidly analyzing the situation in his head. The exit of the high tower must have been blocked. After the first round of firing, the only chance is to escape into that underground cave, and use the cover and the dark environment to kill the enemies. The position of the West District 13 was very awkward. There were almost no covers on this bottom floor, except for a few load-bearing columns. The enemies had the high ground. If they fired back, the West District 13 would be annihilated instantly. Simon decided to strike first. The adrenaline surge made his body excited. He licked his lips, a touch of unfamiliar violence appeared in his eyes. Time to kill again. Simon was well aware of his dangerous personality. This was diagnosed by the psychological counseling priest at the church after he killed several gangsters at the age of 12. But he didn't think that it was another him, it should be more accurate to say, Heath was part of his own emotions. Later studies and treatments at the church also taught Simon how to manage this part of the emotions. Precisely, this allowed him to segregate some negative emotions in his daily life, such as violence, fear, killing, desire, or pain. Simon used to think this was a kind of disease. Later he realized, it was also a kind of self-protection ability. In the face of danger, letting certain emotions burst out would unleash potential, like the legendary story of a mother lifting a huge stone with her bare hands in desperation to save her child. Like he was 12 years old, he could defeat those strong gangsters. That was a kind of potential called hysterical strength. The mysterious power explained that under extreme conditions, the human body would release immense power, full of vitality. But this process was also dangerous, with a high chance of causing various tissue breakdowns in the body and leading to death. Simon wasn't sure if his situation was the same, but once he let him out, his body would become very excited, hormone secretion went wild, strength, nerve response would drastically increase. Now, being pointed at with a sword at his throat, he felt this feeling again. Didn't Captain Carl say to let them make the first move? Simon complained. The residents of Brook Street were already at a disadvantage. Handing the initiative over to the enemy was practically a death wish. A spark of cold determination flashed in his eyes. With a wicked grin, Simon let his shotgun drop. Time seemed to slow as the shotgun descended. Simultaneously, his hands moved with lightning speed, reaching for the two crossbows at his waist. Before the shotgun even hit the ground, the crossbows were in his hands. Load, aim, and fire. The motions were seamless and swift. It was so fast that all anyone saw was a blur of motion. As members of the Iron Hammer gang relished in their role as the hunters and Carl's team struggled to find a solution, the tower suddenly echoed with the thunderous sound of a crossbow firing. Boom! The sound reverberated. On a closer listen, one could distinguish two overlapped shots. The shotgun lacked the range and precision to kill the two crossbowmen aiming at him from above, but the large-caliber handheld crossbow definitely could. Simon's expertise in dual wielding allowed him to aim precisely at two targets. His advanced crossbow mastery meant he could load and fire so quickly that he outpaced the snipers who already had their fingers on the trigger. Following the shot, two heads exploded in a shower of red. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The shot was so unexpected that the 70 or 80 people in the tower were stunned. No one had predicted that a newbie would suddenly attack. As Simon's reflexes kicked in, he used the recoil of the crossbow bolts to fall back. Throughout this, his face remained eerily calm. Seizing the moment of distraction, he pushed off with his feet, rolling out of the crowd. Almost simultaneously, Carl, as a professional, reacted as well. Now's our chance, he thought. With a burst of energy, his legs bulged with muscle as he sprung forward like a tightly coiled spring. He wanted to seize initiative in this battle too. Before this, the majority of their enemies were keeping an eye on Carl, so he had no opportunity to strike first. But now, Simon's crossbows not only broke the stalemate but also relieved some of Carl's pressure, creating a chance for a counterattack. As long as Carl had room to maneuver, in a brief period, he could explode with astonishing speed that the enemy wouldn't be able to keep up with, breaking through the deadlock. The rookies hadn't yet figured out what was happening when the next second, the battle was set off by the sound of crossbows. In no time, nearly 100 firearms on both sides were madly firing. The noise was deafening, like a summer thunderstorm. Boom, 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 boom. The flashes from the gunfire lit up the tower, and the intense shock caused buildings around to crumble like tofu under the barrage of crossbow bolts. Carl's sudden charge had diverted most of the enemy fire. Even so, the people of Brook Street still faced a desperate situation under the enemy's high ground advantage. Apart from a few veterans who managed to roll in time to dodge the crossbow bolts, the rookies were sitting ducks. Their bodies were riddled with holes from the bolts, and many of them fell on the spot. Under such barrage, even Simon, who had already moved several meters away from the crowd, felt the pressure. He had fired the first bolt, which had drawn a considerable amount of fire. Despite his quick reflexes, he was hard-pressed to dodge the barrage of arrows. In the blink of an eye, he felt the scorching wind of several arrows brushing past him. Regardless of his swift reactions, some stray bolts still struck his body. But luckily, he survived. Simon hid behind a thick stone pillar, gasping for breath. In the chaos, even the best agility was useless. His back was marked with a few bloody holes from the bolts. However, since he survived the initial onslaught, Simon's eyes glowed with increasing ferocity. He gripped his longbow, anticipating the countdown in his mind, 5, 4, 3. Sure enough, within 5 seconds, the sound of arrows had significantly quieted down. He knew it was the brief interval where the heavy bowmen had exhausted their first round of arrows. A fierce light flashed in Simon's eyes, and he thought, now's the time. Without hesitation, he charged out again. Any ordinary person would prioritize self-preservation in this situation. But Simon knew very well that unless he killed all these members of the Iron Brothers gang, he wouldn't leave the tower alive. Captain Carl was strong, but he stood no chance against two professionals. If Carl were to die, Simon's fate would be sealed. Hence, Simon didn't cling to any hope. Even if he wasn't the enemy's main target at the moment, he had to take the offensive. Simon darted out from behind the pillar. It looked like he didn't take time to aim properly before he started firing his arrows. Yet, each time his bowstring vibrated, an enemy fell from the tower with an arrow in them. If one observed closely, they would notice that not only did his arrows hit, but they also struck fatal areas, hearts, skulls. At that moment, Simon, with his longbow in hand, looked as cold as death. He was the Grim Reaper, mercilessly harvesting the lives of the enemy. 2 longbows, one with 6 arrows, one with 8. In a mere 2.4 seconds, 14 arrows took 12 or 13 lives. Listening to the sounds, analyzing the trajectory of arrows, and judging the enemy's position, this was the marvel of advanced bow mastery. It felt magical, as if the bow and arrow were extensions of his arms, and the arrows were connected to him with invisible threads. Where his intent went, the arrows followed. Simon had determined the rough positions of the dozen archers when he rushed out earlier. Just a glance was enough to lock onto their locations. There was no need for time-consuming aim, his archery was as smooth as breathing. However, arrows were, after all, limited. Even at his best, he only had 2 bows. The luck of his shots was purely due to Carl's distraction of most of the firepower, catching the Black Iron Brotherhood off guard. But these gangsters, who had tasted blood, wouldn't give him the opportunity to change his quiver and fire again. Simon knew this well, he only had 1 round of archery opportunity. Immediately after this round of arrow attacks, he rolled without hesitation, and tucked himself behind a sturdy stone pillar while emptying his quiver, which was less than 10 meters from the entrance of the underground dungeon. The next second, a rainstorm of arrows poured onto the stone pillar, with Simon curling up his body as much as possible to avoid being hit. Thud, 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 thud. The sound of the arrows made his eardrums throb. Scraps of stone and arrow fragments whizzed by. At this moment, Simon's gaze cleared again. The members of the Black Iron Brotherhood were not blind to Simon's extraordinary archery skills. Excluding the ironclad giant Sylvester, who had no fear of arrows, no one dared to stick their heads out carelessly, all of them hiding behind their covers for protection. It was terrifying, to say the least. 1 arrow, 1 headshot, it was enough to make anyone feel a throbbing pain in their head. Red-haired Constantine cursed out loud, seemingly questioning the one who had provided incorrect information. Damn it! How can there be an archery master within the Crusaders? Didn't they say that except for Carl, there was no threat? What the hell is going on now? The Archery Master is a title exclusive to high-level archers. In the entire outer city, apart from those select few famous archery masters, this was already the ceiling of archery prowess a common person could reach. This kind of archer was a rarity even amongst the 3 noble forces. Yet now, an unknown newbie turned out to be an archery master. But which archery master wasn't an old archer who had been feeding arrows for decades? He looked young, so how did he develop such archery skills? A freak? Constantine was cursing in his heart. The original plan of the Black Iron Brotherhood's 2 knights teaming up to deal with Carl was foolproof. They were about to succeed, but a change suddenly occurred. An archer of this level could not be overlooked. Otherwise, it would also be an extremely deadly threat to the knights. Seizing this opportunity, Carl got a chance to catch his breath. His face lit up with joy, he swiftly retreated and took cover behind a stone pillar. And that position was just right to make eye contact with Simon. The 2 exchanged a glance, and Carl couldn't hide his shock. He knew that Simon was good at archery, but he never thought that his archery skills would reach such a high level. It turned out that there was an archery master hidden in his own team. However, now was not the time to talk about this. Simon also made a gesture to him, pointing to the underground dungeon entrance nearby. Carl understood instantly. The enemy was in a superior position, it was impossible for them to break free. Even with Simon's astonishing archery, it was very difficult for him to kill the 2 enemy knights. The only way out now was to escape to the underground dungeon, perhaps they could hold out until the reinforcements arrived. But the enemy didn't give them much chance to breathe. The arrow attack could not break the load-bearing pillar for the time being, but the fire could burn it. Simon knew that Constantine had the ability to manipulate fire, but he had never seen it. And in the next moment, he immediately experienced the method of the pseudo-knight. The bottom of the large silo suddenly lit up with a dazzling red light. Simon sensed danger and saw a flame spurting out of the mech flamethrower on Constantine's arm. As soon as the flame touched the air, it instantly turned into a small fireball, and in the blink of an eye, the small fireball grew into a huge fireball with a diameter of about 10 meters in the wind. This was not a simple burn, but a range spell created by a fire control technique. Alchemy technique Flame Blast. Even before the fireball arrived, Simon could feel the air being scorched, breathing felt painful and burning. Not good. Simon whispered to himself, without the alchemy curse, there is still a bit of a gap between the combat power and the official knights. He had been suppressed by the rocket just now and didn't dare to show his head, but he didn't realize that Constantine had already gotten very close. This fireball was unavoidable. Simon was also very decisive. As soon as the red light lit up, he had already switched to a strangely shaped rocket in his hand. It was the famous arrow, 3-headed beast. In this situation, he planned to risk being hit and burned, and give Constantine a round of alchemy bullets. Only by having the mentality of mutual destruction can bring a glimmer of hope to this desperate situation. At this critical moment, a figure suddenly rushed towards him regardless of the fire. Ha! Simon saw that it was Carl, and immediately realized what he was going to do. In the instant of this thought, he only felt as if he had been hit in the stomach by a cheetah, and his body was thrown back at high speed. Too fast. Almost at the same time, the endless flames, like a tsunami, fiercely slapped onto the 2 of them. With this impact, the momentum of the 2 of them falling was even faster. After a boom of explosion, they directly fell into the dark underground dungeon. Seeing Simon and Carl fall into the hole, Constantine yelled, "That guy is injured. Chase, we mustn't leave any survivors." He was well aware that Karl was severely injured by this hit, and now was absolutely the best time to kill him. Without any hesitation, 20 or 30 members of the Black Iron Brotherhood chased into the dark underground dungeon one after another. Simon was surprised that Karl would take him along at such a critical moment. Karl's muscle power was enough to leave him unscathed from the blast, easily leaping into the dark cave. But carrying another person, he was seriously wounded by the aftermath of the blast. Undeniably, however, it was the right choice. Besides his good nature, as the team leader, Karl would never abandon his team members and escape alone. Especially under the current circumstances, if Simon also died, he wouldn't stand a chance against the pursuit of the Hammer brothers. Even if he escaped into the dark cave, it would only postpone the inevitable. The two fell into the dark cave and tumbled to the ground. Simon immediately smelled the scent of burnt flesh and hair. His night vision was good, and he noticed the severe burn on Karl's back with possible bleeding wounds. It seemed that Karl had also been shot in the fire. Karl, gasping for breath, stood up. The iron armor had melted and stuck to his skin, causing him to grit his teeth in pain. However, he didn't make a sound, but pulled out a bottle of healing potion and jabbed it into his leg to temporarily stall the worsening of his injuries. He then asked, "Simon, are you all right?" "I'm fine." Simon himself was okay. Thanks to Karl blocking him, he was only mildly burnt on his thigh and the iron sand on his back was not too deep. These injuries didn't affect his movements much. Looking at the trident in Simon's hand, Karl appeared slightly surprised, but he didn't ask further. Many gang members have their own secrets. Glancing at the darkness around them, he said seriously, "We can't stay here for long. Once the Hammer brothers know I'm injured, they'll surely follow us down here." "Yeah." Simon nodded. If he were one of the Hammer brothers, he would definitely come down to finish them off. If Karl didn't die, their mission would be meaningless. They didn't say much, and continued to walk while observing their surroundings. Looking around, Simon realized they were probably in an ancient underground city from 1,000 years ago. There were platforms, stairs, waiting rooms, and even traces of decaying tracks. Karl's magical vision potion didn't allow him to see clearly, but having grown up in the slums, he knew how to navigate underground. He listened for the sound of water and whispered, "There's water sound from the west, that passage should not be blocked. I'll distract them for you, you go ahead first. Their target is me, we'll try to hold on as long as we can. The gang must have received the news by now and will send reinforcements. Maybe we can still survive." Upon hearing this, Simon raised his eyebrows slightly. Karl's plan was sound. If they stayed together, they would only slow each other down. But looking at the lurking shadows in the darkness, Simon frowned. In this dark cave, it wasn't just them, there were also some indigenous residents. Considering the demon they had just killed, there might be more unknown creatures underground. If they ventured further, the odds of survival might not be higher than facing the Hammer brothers. Thinking of this, Simon shook his head and said, "I think we better not go too deep." Karl seemed to have also thought of the creatures, and his brows furrowed, "But now, it seems we don't have a better choice." "No, I think we can ambush them here." Simon looked at the layout of the ancient underground city. Whether it was the platform, passage, or track, everything was relatively well preserved. In the just concluded battle, these ancient castles held off most of the crossbow bolts, giving Simon a measure of confidence. This was the best cover. For crossbowmen, this maze-like dungeon presented the most advantageous battlefield. "You plan to ambush them here?" Upon hearing Simon's audacious proposal, Karl was evidently taken aback. The enemy's numbers were tenfold. At this moment, to make such a statement, one would either have to be mad or extraordinarily capable. At least for him, a close combat adventurer, there was no chance of victory. Simon's suggestion seemed to appeal to Karl, too. Counterattacking was far more gratifying than being chased away in disarray. A gleam appeared in his eyes as he asked, "Are you sure?" He hadn't realized that the usually quiet companion could have such a wild side. But recalling how he took down more than a dozen members of the Iron Hammer Brotherhood single-handedly, Karl found this new recruit increasingly intriguing. The environment here is ideal for sniping. Except for the two adventurers, the rest are of no concern. Simon spoke these words with a calm demeanor. Karl, however, detected a confidence in his tone. He realized, this was a crossbow master who never missed. Simon continued his analysis, "But once I let loose my crossbow, my location will be revealed. That ironclad beast Sylvester will certainly come for me first. By then, I'll need you, our captain, to buy some time. I still have 2 magic bolts left. If we're lucky, perhaps we could eliminate him and counterattack." Counterattack? Not only sniping, but they're also planning a counterattack. Upon hearing this, Karl brightened up immediately. A moment of contemplation led him to grasp the key to this tactic. To counterattack, the two of them couldn't separate, otherwise, they'd be picked off one by one. Even when armed with a crossbow, adventurers were no easy targets. Advanced adventurers had extremely fast reaction times and were highly alert. Killing them would be difficult, even for a crossbow master, not to mention the fact that their enemy included an invincible, ironclad beast, Sylvester. Yet observing the impassive Simon, Carl understood that his calm demeanor was backed up by solid confidence. This guy must have an ace up his sleeve. Okay. Carl chose to trust Simon, nodding without a moment's hesitation, then said, Sylvester may counter my profession a bit. But it's impossible for him to defeat me in a short time. Simon, please do hold him off for at least 10 breaths. Carl, just 10 breaths? That's absolutely no problem. Simon found it efficient to communicate with intelligent people. He continued, not just the Iron Hammer Brotherhood, but also the underground demons. I heard some strange noises near the water source earlier, which might be a demon nest. He pointed into the darkness. This was the primary reason why Simon chose to risk staying here for an ambush instead of fleeing. He explained, most of the underground demons detect through auditory perception. Once I fire the crossbow, it might attract these demons. But they're not just our enemies, the members of the Iron Hammer Brotherhood would have to deal with them, too. We could use the demons to distract them, but it's a risk for us as well. Upon hearing this, Carl seemed to have an epiphany, slapping his thigh. Right, how could I forget about the underground demons? Currently, the enemies had the advantage in numbers. But once the underground demons joined in, it would become a three-sided melee. The Iron Hammer Brotherhood's numerical advantage would instantly crumble. Instead, Simon and Carl's two-man team, being smaller and thus less noticeable, could maneuver more flexibly. The situation was critical, leaving the two of them with little time to discuss details. Simon quickly set up a magic explosion trap with magic trap wire where they had passed. Then the two chose a passageway that allowed for easy retreat or advancement, waiting for the enemy. Sure enough, a group of people stormed into the dark cave a few seconds later. The magic illumination orb lit up several figures, but Simon didn't rush to act. His gaze was fixed on Sylvester and Cantu, the two adventurers, who were conveniently hiding in the shadows where the illumination couldn't reach. Those guys were clever too. Knowing Simon's impressive crossbow skills, they had evidently anticipated a possible ambush and let the regular adventure team lead. The moment Simon fired his crossbow and revealed his position, the initiative would instantly shift. Cantu, a veteran of many battles, spotted traces of unknown creatures on the ground and sensed potential danger. He warned, everyone, be careful. I have a feeling something's not right in this dark cave.